Hi guys, welcome back to In Case of Econ Struggles and welcome to another macro struggle. Today we are continuing to talk about Bill's Coconut Island. We are going to talk about the labor market on Bill's Coconut Island. We are going to review the wages in a competitive labor market when that labor market is in equilibrium. Then we'll derive labor demand and we will also derive labor supply. And in doing so, we're going to talk about how Bill reacts to changes in his wage. And then we will talk about the equilibrium in the labor market as a whole. Timestamps are below. Before we get into it, I just want to take a quick second and take a recap of where we are. So we did Bill's Coconut World intro in a previous video, and what we are trying to do is we are trying to build up this ISLM model. This ISLM model, remember, is three markets: the asset market, the labor market, and the goods market. And today we are going to be talking about the labor market. We'll talk about the asset market and the goods market in other videos. So let's get into it. Let's quickly review the wages in equilibrium. We get the wages in equilibrium from the profit maximization problem, where this is the setup of the profit maximization problem. And we take our first order conditions, our derivatives, and we get that P times the marginal product of labor is wage, and P times the marginal product of capital is capital, which is all well and good. Now let's think about what our price is on Bill's Coconut Island. And the price is just one because there is no money on Bill's Coconut Island. So one coconut is worth a coconut. So we can take this P out and we just have that wage is the marginal product of labor and the rental rate is the marginal product of capital. Now here is Bill. Bill works for the man. He works for this coconut picking firm. And in exchange for his labor, he gets paid, like we just said, his wage, which is a marginal product of labor. And remember, he's getting paid in coconut. Now, when Bill goes to leave the firm, there's a bag of coconuts for him as he leaves. He picks up his bag of coconuts. The number of coconuts in that bag is equal to the marginal product of labor. And that is what he takes home for the day. So now we're going to talk about these questions. So let's start with labor demanded. Now, labor demanded is equal to the marginal product of labor. We know from our previous econ knowledge that the marginal product is diminishing, so it slopes downward. So it's going to look something like this. So this is labor demand. This is equal to the marginal product of labor, because again, we know in equilibrium that wage is equal to the marginal product of labor. So it looks exactly like this curve right here. Now we're going to talk about labor supply. And labor supply, remember, is coming from Bill. Bill is choosing how much he wants to work for this firm. The main question we need to ask now is, if the wage goes up, how does Bill change how much he wants to work? Does he want to work more? Does he want to work less? And that is not necessarily such an easy question to answer, because he could want to work more. If he does want to work more, that's called the substitution effect. Substitution effect, meaning, well, now it's worth more for Bill to go to work than to sit on his couch. He can trade an hour of leisure and an hour of sitting on the couch for more coconuts if he goes to work. So that's what we call the substitution effect. If Bill wants to work less when the wage goes up, that's what we call the income effect, because maybe Bill's quite happy with the number of coconuts that he gets every day. So now if the wage goes up, he can work less hours and still get that same number of coconuts. So what we are going to say, what we generally assume, is that the ratio is like this, where the substitution effect is greater than the income effect, which means that as the wage goes up, Bill's labor supply will also go up. So if we want to put this on a graph with labor supply, it's going to look something like this. This is upward sloping because, again, this is the substitution effect dominates. So we say the substitution effect dominates. It's a very common thing in econ to say when we talk about this upward sloping labor supply curve. So when you hear the phrase, the labor supply is upward sloping because the substitution effect dominates, all that means is Bill would rather work more when his wage goes up than work less. So let's now talk about equilibrium. So equilibrium, we have our nice upward sloping labor supply curve, which we just talked about. We also have a downward sloping labor demand, which is equal to the marginal product of labor. It's econ, we're talking about equilibrium, we're talking about when the graphs intersect. So we are right here. So here is the W star, and here is the L star. Let's talk about how equilibrium changes with respect to some of these curves. So maybe let's say that for some reason, the marginal product of labor goes up. Suddenly, the firm figures out a cool new way to pick coconuts. They are really excited about it, and they become just so much better at picking coconuts. So now we have this upward labor supply, which isn't going to change. And now we're going to focus on this labor demand. Remember, this is equal to marginal product of labor. So if marginal product of labor goes up for every level of labor, maybe we're here. So this is the marginal product of labor at this point. But now the marginal product of labor has gone up. So now we're up here. So everywhere along this curve, we shift up by the same amount to get to some new labor demand curve. I'll show that in pink. So here's our new labor demand curve. I'll call it LD1. And we can see that what's going to happen is we are going to get to this point here. So our labor supplied and labor demanded has gone up, and our wage has also gone up. So hopefully this makes a little sense and gives you a quick example on how the equilibrium in the labor market changes and what the equilibrium in the labor market is. If it did, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time for another case of econ struggles.